Hi Pinkies! Welcome to another Storytelling Saturday. As you can see, we're on the set of Donuts If I Do right now, and as much as I'd like to do a Storytelling Saturday here, I didn't do all this makeup just to be indoors. So let's go outside. So one thing I've been thinking about a lot since my last Storytime Saturday was forgiveness. I've been rewatching Steven Universe, and one thing I noticed in season 1 is that there's some inconsistency. Like many shows, Steven Universe grows as the seasons continue. Season 1 is a lot of, growth for Steven, coming of age type stuff, him fighting these monsters, learning how to become a superhero, a crystal gem. There's also a lot of actual coming of age, learning what's right and wrong type stories. In that first season, he's always fighting these monsters. They're unique creatures, and each of them has a name and a designation and something special about what they do or what they eat. They have adaptations like actual earth creatures. Later in the show, however, we find out that these monsters are just like the crystal gems.
All those monsters we fight used to be just like us, right, Pearl?
Yes, but they've become corrupted and broken. We have to take care of them, subdue them, contain them. It's the best we can do for them for now.
Corruption is a thing early in Steven Universe that there's no way to fix. So the only way to care for these people is to destroy them and then bubble them, therefore making all the violence in the show justified. It's a really smart bit of writing that lets the villains of the show be really dumb and really killable, but at the same time, there's no consequences. There's no actual killing going on. They're saving them. In retrospect though, this little bit of lore doesn't make all that much sense. Gems, as we later learn, are synthetic. They're not organic creatures, and they don't really have a need for eating. Some of them do like eating, like amethyst, but not all of them do. They don't need to do it. However, these monsters all eat, for the most part. They all have little sources of food that they like to eat. Oftentimes, these sources of food are distinctly described or shown on screen. Sometimes these sources of food are even the weakness that Steven exploits in order to defeat these creatures. Like I said now, in retrospect, this doesn't make too much sense. Obviously, you can headcanon it and you can say, well, they don't need to eat, but because they're corrupted, maybe they don't understand what they are anymore. Maybe they think that they're an organic creature even though they're not. But one undeniable fact is that Pearl likes to eat in the first season. Later on in the show, a distinct characteristic that is expressed by Pearl is that she doesn't like to eat. She thinks it's disgusting. She doesn't like that she chews it and it goes through you and it comes out. It's gross to her. In the very first episode, Steven goes out to get donuts for the gems. They've asked him to do it. In Together Breakfast, she seems interested in eating the breakfast, and then after they all are disgusted by the breakfast, she says pizza is good. She wants pizza. So this little bit of characterization, in retrospect, wasn't there before, but later in the show is added, and it deepens the character, but also retcons what's come before. Oftentimes, I will think, who is the next George Lucas? Who is the person that's furthering technology and telling stories in a way that George does? All of these little things in history, all of our religions and mythology are entangled and remixed in a way where something is so resonant in storytelling. The easy answer would be Dave Filoni or Jon Favreau or even Kevin Feige, some might say. But I think those are pretty disinteresting choices. George created a mega franchise from nothing. He's not a Disney person. It's not like he was part of a studio, just made a movie in a franchise. He created the thing. Even Kevin Feige, who did start a universe, started after years of experience with studio producing. Dave Filoni worked at the hands of the master with George Lucas, but he has no interest in starting a new franchise. He wants to stay in Star Wars. I think he's really talented at it, but I don't think he's the next George. When it comes to the next George, I have a few ideas in mind, but I think that's a whole different video. What I really want to focus on now is how George writes. There's something really special that George Lucas does that I think we're all aware of, but we don't really talk about it that much. George Lucas has this way of creating stories vaguely. He will leave in a gap and go back and write the story that fills in that gap, but then leave a gap in that story, and then be able to go in there and write a story in there, but leave a gap. And it's going on and on and on. Dave Filoni also has this ability, and it's just interesting how they can do it. I think part of the reason that George is able to do this is that he has this flexibility in the way that he operates. He's collaborative in a way that a lot of people don't understand. When George Lucas was creating Count Dooku, the one that we got was not his original intent. He was aiming for a character who looked and acted like Asajj Ventress, but when Christopher Lee was brought on board, he changed the whole thing, and we got a great character. At first, I don't think he was that interesting, but now, because they left it vague, they were able to fill in those gaps and make him so interesting. This vagueness is intentional, and because it's intentional, he had so much more creative freedom when going back and telling the prequels. There's an interview with Rebecca Sugar that I think about a lot where she talks about writing Steven Universe. When she started the writing process, she knew exactly where Steven was going to end up. But she purposely left gaps in how the characters will get there, or what some characters might look, sound like, act like, what their backstories might be, how they can weave into the story. All of those things were left open. As we've talked about, leaving these creative gaps can really help the collaborative process. But what's also important to think about is the human mind and how it works. The human brain has this amazing capacity to infer and to draw patterns. If you show me a character who's like tapping his arm in public, seems worried, I can interpret so many things about him. I can create a story in my brain just from the tapping, just from the physical behavior. This guy has a bomb on him. I can think, this person's really uncomfortable in public. Whatever the story I draw from it is, it's in my head. I've been rewatching a lot of Lost, and one thing that I really love about that show is J.J. Abrams wrote all of these gaps, just like George Lucas did, or Rebecca Sugar did, for the writers to fill in. In this case, he got really lucky because the writer was Damon Lindelof. Damon Lindelof is an incredible writer. Often, J.J. Abrams is criticized for the mystery box. The mystery box is this concept that it doesn't really matter what this box is you introduce, whatever's in it. It doesn't matter to us, the writers. It does matter to the watchers. J.J. Abrams had this idea, hey, what if there's just a polar bear in the woods? And Damon Lindelof said, what? A polar bear? Where'd it come from? J.J. Abrams says, I don't know. We'll fill that in later. What's inside the hatch? I don't know. We'll fill that in later. This idea of leaving these creative gaps to continually world build this universe. People got really sick of this concept with Lost because every season they would keep growing it. They would keep leaving questions unanswered, and the answers they would sometimes give were unsatiating. I love Lost. I think everything about that is a great show. I think there's some areas that could be improved. I've noticed some technical errors, but as far as writing goes, I think it's a really interesting case study. The crows are actually going insane. Like, can you not? Forgiveness is a really interesting concept in storytelling to me. Oftentimes you'll see a story where the main character will forgive, and that's what sets them apart from the villain. Luke Skywalker forgives his father. Steven from Steven Universe pretty much forgives every villain in that show, including monsters who cannot think. I think there's been this recent, modern lashing out against the concept of forgiveness. If we look at the Marvel movies, I think this is a perfect example. There's not a lot of cases of forgiveness in those movies. The villains at the end will often die. The Marvel heroes have no issue with killing. If you contrast that with Man of Steel, Superman's whole argument in that movie against Zod is trying to forgive him, trying to redeem him, trying to get him on Superman's side. In Marvel movies, this doesn't really seem to be the goal of the heroes. Oftentimes, the villain and the hero will both be killers. Who they will kill with those powers is different. I think Marvel might be partially responsible for this lashing out against the concept of forgiveness. I think people want a villain to be irredeemable sometimes. People want a villain who is willing to die for their cause. They want a General Zod, they want a Killmonger, whatever villain that may be, they want that villain to be able to die for their cause. They want that villain to be able to go further than the hero will, to be more evil, to be irredeemable. And I've been grappling with this a lot lately. I disagree with this notion in a lot of ways. I think a character can be more interesting and have a totally different path if they get redeemed. Smallville had a pretty interesting way of doing this where they used Lionel Luthor, who's the father of Lex Luthor. He's really evil. He's more evil than Lex is. Lex hasn't even become evil yet, but his father is, bad guy. We don't like him. Lionel Luthor has this arc where he loses his vision, and with his vision, he loses a lot of the hatred and vengeance that he has in him. He becomes less businessman-esque and more philanthropist-y. Because we get to have this redemption arc, we also get to have a lot of conflict around that. Lionel Luthor is not a good person. He's had a lot of past actions that make us not trust him. In the end of season 2 or season 1, there's a big storm in Smallville. Lex Luthor has the opportunity to kill his father, to let his father die in this storm. And as the audience, you're kind of rooting for him. Lionel Luthor is a horrible person. Lex so far has been super duper good, but this would represent a turn in Lex's character, the first turn towards his villainous era. Lionel Luthor survives this, Lex does not turn. Later on in the show, he starts becoming good. Everybody starts to trust him a little more. He starts helping out the Kents. He funds Jonathan Kent's mayoral campaign, which is a whole nother thing, and I totally think that doesn't fit with Jonathan Kent's character of a farmer man. Why would he become the mayor? Whatever. Governor. I don't know about politics that much. Doesn't matter. Because we get this Lionel Luthor arc, we also can't trust if it's true. Lionel Luthor is devious. He's went to jail. He's switched bodies with Clark to get out of jail. He's done so many things that make us not expect what's next. He almost seems more powerful than Superman himself in the show. This conflict that we get to have because we don't know if he truly is now good, we don't know as an audience if we can forgive him yet, is such an interesting one, and I don't think it's one that I've seen done a lot. If you forgave Vader and Vader survived Return of the Jedi, would you still trust him? Sure, you forgive him, but he still murdered so many people. How do we know he's not going to do that again? Marvel movies have established the idea that the main hero does not need to forgive the villain. It also means that our characters can become more interesting. Who they choose to forgive lets us have the opportunity to disagree with some heroes and agree with others. This has always been one of the most interesting characterizations of Batman and Superman as characters. Superman is sort of this totally loving person who can forgive anybody. There's a famous comic book where he comes up to the villains who are about to rob this bank, and in shame they drop their weapons and try to be better people, because Superman inspires this character that's so loving. Everybody is inspired by him. Batman doesn't trust people. He's vengeful. He will put people in prison. He will use the systems that are in place with this broken world we live in. That conflict has always been the interest between those two characters, and that's what I've been thinking about with Forgiveness. I have more thoughts on it, but I'm running out of battery and time, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Bye, Pinkies!